back, fellow football fanatics. This is College Football with Sam. A little bit of a different show today. I want to answer any questions you guys have, but more importantly, quickly run through what I'm thinking for my top 25, just kind of as a fun exercise to do with everyone, and also get any content suggestions you have. So this is a pretty, I guess, open platform stream. I don't really have a plan other than being on here until sometime between 6:45 and 7. Just ask away questions. Super chats will get priority, of course, but ask away questions and give me content ideas that you want to see. And I'm also going to be, just to pass the time and let the comments build up, I want to talk about my top 25. So to segue in, I want to, I think, first start off with teams because this is just the easiest place to start. It's easier to start from who do you think is going to be your preseason number one and then work your way down from there to the top, top 25, to that 25th, 24th, 23rd spot. I did a top 35. I don't think that was branded all that well. So I want to do something different. But regardless of that, looking at my top 25 or my rankings as I have it, I have really two sets of rankings. These rankings are what I think college football looks like at the beginning of the year and what I expect it to look like at the end of the year. Typically, I use what I think is going to be the case at the end of the year because I love projections, I love hypotheticals, and yeah, it's interesting. I feel like we already have a good feel of what the teams are going to be like entering the year, although I personally don't. I feel like I have a better idea, or at least have done more thought about projecting how the year's going to go, rather than how I think these teams are as they enter the season. So I think at the end of the year, Penn State's going to be number one. I sort of have them in a tier of their own. I believe that they are in a tier of their own because of their coordinators, their assistant coaches, the fact that their blue chip ratio is almost at 70% sort of is more of a floor setter for me than a ceiling setter, just with how old they are, how proven they are, and the fact that they have the nation's best defensive coordinator and the nation's best offensive coordinator. They also actually have wide receivers to run in that offense now, and they return almost all of their offensive line. They return 2-star running backs, and they are using the mold of Ohio State and Michigan, who came before them. That's what they're using to ultimately go on what they want to. They're ultimately going on that national championship run. That's their goal. So I do have Penn State in that number one slot for my top 25. It gets a little bit tricky after Penn State. I think that Penn State, again, is going to be in a tier of their own. And this is an open source live show. By open source, I mean you guys get to have a lot of input on this live show. Heck, if someone sends a large enough super chat and says, hey, only talk about this for the rest of the show, I might just do that. But anyway, I'm just talking about my top 25 until I get enough questions in the chat, which they're building right now. And yeah, if you have a top 25, send it in the live chat. I would be very interested in seeing it, responding to it. So I have Penn State number one in its own tier. Don't think we need to go over it more than I already have. Possible round one pick one at quarterback, possible first round back in Nicholas Singleton. Wouldn't be shocked if one of their tackles got picked in the first round. They have a corner in A.J. Harris, who I think is going to be a first rounder perhaps, and they may have 2 first round defensive linemen. It's a very talented team, and that staff is the best staff in America. It gets tricky after Penn State, though, because I have a group of arguably 5 teams who I think can be anywhere from number 2 to number 6. maybe it can be a group of 6, anywhere from number 7 to number 2. I have Texas, Clemson, Georgia, Oregon, Ohio State, and Alabama sort of in their own tier. So 2 Big Ten teams, 2 SEC, three SEC teams, 2 Big Ten teams, and then I have 1 ACC team. Clemson, I think, is the team that out of all of those 7 has both the lowest floor and potentially the highest ceiling, outside of maybe Texas. And just because Ohio State has those 2 elite players, Ohio State's ceiling is going to be very high, for sure. Clemson's probably the trickiest one out of all those. I could see Clemson being as low as 7th or even being lower than the top 7. I could see them outside of that. And some teams like whether it's Texas A&M or Notre Dame or Miami or, even USC or Michigan or maybe even Indiana. I mean, there's a good amount of teams I could see finishing ahead of Clemson if Clemson continues its trend of basically disappointing with talent over and over and over again. And I'm not going to lie to you, I have questions about Clemson's staff. I think that every team inside that top 7, minus Alabama, has a better staff. And Alabama's more talented, and I think Alabama has a better head coach. Clemson's assistants and coordinators are better, but if you told me I have to put my trust in Kalen DeBoer or Dabo Swinney to come up with a brilliant game plan entering a matchup and winning it, with all else being equal, it would be DeBoer by a mile. So just a lot of variability in there right now, and let me know what you guys think of this in the live chat, or if you're listening to this after it's live, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Intuitively, I have Texas at 2 because Texas, outside of Clemson and Alabama, is the oldest of the bunch. They've done the best job at recruiting and using the portal combined, I think. Sark is now in year 5. So all of these players are now his, similar with Ryan Day, similar with Sweeney and Kirby, but ahead of the curve there in comparison, just a little bit to Lanning and definitely with DeBoer. I think that in that next tier, with, again, Penn State at 1, and I think that at the end of the year, Penn State will probably they'll be better than everyone else in the same way that Ohio State is. If not potentially more dominant, because I think this year might be more of a down year than last year, and this Penn State team will have the offensive line and the rushing attack. And on top of that, if Allard does take a step forward, he'll probably be better than what Howard was last year. And that will just give Penn State a much higher floor in games where maybe things don't go right. So I think that in the playoffs, they'll be very dominant. And I think they'll be dominant in the regular season as well. I've already stated before, I think that, and I'm not super attached to this opinion, but intuitively, I think that this Penn State team is going to be better than the Ohio State and Michigan team that came before it. I think that they're going to be a lot like 2021 Georgia. You're not going to quite have the same amount of athleticism or upside there. You don't have the same head coach. That's why I pause at saying this Penn State team will be better than that Georgia team. But I think that the coordinator duo that Penn State has here is unprecedented. And I think that, look, they're very old. They do an excellent job at developing. The offensive line is extremely deep. Drew Aller is probably the most talented quarterback. In comparing him against every national champion, he may be the best quarterback since Joe Burrow, if Penn State goes on to win the title in terms of NFL talent. Now, in terms of on-the-field production, we'll see if he can surpass 2021 Stetson Bennett. Definitely won't surpass 2020 Mac Jones, for example. Just to put that out there. But I put Texas at 2 because I think their staff is the second best in America. At worst, it's third best behind Georgia and Penn State. Or, I mean, heck, if you weigh for head coach especially hard, Georgia might have the best because I think Smart's the best head coach in America. But I would put Texas at 2. I think their defense, it's going to be them or Penn State who has the best defense. They won't have Penn State's offense, but they will have a more physical ground game. They will have better quarterback play than they did last year, at least by the end of the year. I don't know about the beginning. I wouldn't have Texas number 2 beginning of the year. I think entering the season, Penn State or Clemson's number 1. I think there are just so many teams at the top that lose so much that at the beginning of the year, people will argue that there are 20 teams that have the potential to win it all. I think it could be that week. But very quickly, and by that I mean probably by the end of September, October, in the same way that Oregon, for example, went from looking like absolute garbage within 2 weeks to week 3, they piece it together against Oregon State, and then they begin to pick up momentum and get better. That will happen with a lot of teams. After September, maybe for some it will take into October or even November, but teams will begin piecing themselves together, and by the playoffs, you will have a much stronger field than you did in September, as is usually the case, I think, with a lot of college football seasons, barring the best teams having severe injuries. And Texas has the depth to deal with severe injuries. It's the same thing with Clemson. It's why I have Clemson at third. What sets, I think, Texas and Clemson apart from Georgia, Oregon, Ohio State, and to a lesser degree Bama, because Bama is older in their two deep, in their starting lineup. Alabama can probably afford a critical injury more than Ohio State, Oregon, or Georgia can. But I also think that Ohio State, Oregon, and Georgia have much better starters than Alabama does on an average basis, and they all have better staffs. So that's why I have them grouped together, even though by experience Alabama is more in that Clemson, Texas, and Penn State lineup. A combo of experience and age at the very least. Age matters a lot too. Ohio State and Michigan weren't just experienced, they were also old. The 2024 Buckeyes returned about as much production as the 2023 Buckeyes did, but they were almost entirely a year older. And you saw that on the field, and it was a huge part of the reason why they were able to not just win the national title, that's why they were able to ace some teams too. It's also why Oregon, despite regressing from 2023 to 2024, was able to win more games in arguably a tougher conference with a tougher schedule. They were older. Like, age matters. It helps you win those close games. It's not a guarantee, it's not gospel, but you have to piece a lot of these things together. Clemson is old. Clemson has a ton of experience coming back. They were a top 15 team last year, and with how much they return compared to how much everyone else loses, I would venture to say, we got a super chat here, so let me finish my thought and then I'll get to the super chat. I would venture to say that in the modern era, returning a ton of production is more important now than ever because teams are going to be constantly losing it, whether it's through the portal or we no longer have COVID years. So the 6th year of eligibility is gone. I mean, this is the last year that you're going to have it unless anyone who was a part of the 2020 class is a medical redshirt. After this season, the COVID year will be entirely gone. And most of the teams with COVID year eligibility who used it in the past to do great things, they used it with NFL picks, or they used it with higher talented players. A lot of the teams now that have super seniors, if any, are kind of on that more lower rung, and they're probably players who've used the portal a lot, if you catch what I'm saying. Clemson is at third because of their roster continuity, their staff continuity. They made an upgrade at DC. Dabo Swinney's also done this before, and no one else has won a title outside of Kirby Smart and Ryan Day. No one else. So intuitively, I have Clemson. I have Clemson at 6. Not 6. I have them at third. However, I am willing to change my mind there. I think really outside of Penn State at 1, I'm open to be convinced that my assessments of some other teams are pretty wrong. So if you want to convince me that I'm wrong, comment down below. Comment in the live chat. Be active. But I do want to pull up this super chat here from SFS Inverted. Thank you very much for the $5 super chat. Ball State is going to win it all, Sam. I don't know why this is a discussion. Well, thank you very much for that. I don't know much about Ball State football at all. I'm very curious if they even have a chance to win the MAC, for example. Thank you for that $5 super chat, SFS Inverted. Sam, who's your top feature back in the Big Ten and the SEC? That is an elite question. Elite question. So I have the answer for that because I already have figured out my All-American lists, all Big Ten lists. I just have to work hard at getting graphics for them. I don't know if I'll have the time to do all that, but I think I can. Okay, so my feature back in the Big Ten, I'm going to give you a complicated answer. I would put Singleton at 1. But if you want to give me the argument that Mackay Hughes is 2, I will listen to it. For the SEC, it's either CJ Baxter at Texas. I think he's going to have a monster year, or it's Jaden Ott. Those are my Big Ten and SEC feature backs. Nicholas Singleton or Mackay Hughes for Oregon. I'd lean Singleton, but if you really want to make the argument for Hughes with Oregon, I'll listen to it. It's the same thing with Baxter and Ott. I'm going with Baxter because I think Texas's O-line and offensive scheme is going to be way better than Oklahoma's. And Baxter was awesome before he got hurt. So I imagine with a whole preseason of recovery and the fact that Texas is one of the best strength and conditioning programs in America, and Kyle Flood's an elite offensive coordinator, O-line coach. He doesn't call the plays, but he has the title of offensive coordinator. An elite O-line coach. I think this O-line is going to have better chemistry out of the gate than people think because there are no transfers. And they're old. They have, senior, several juniors. It's a unit that has more experience, age, and talent than people think on its surface. This isn't like Michigan losing 4 out of their 5 starting offensive linemen after 2023, where there's just a massive drop-off in experience. They had to go out and get use the portal. They lost their O-line coach, and they had to change an offensive coordinator. Texas is staff continuity, and I think that Texas has I think they recruit better than Michigan does in the O-line. By blue chip ratio, it's actually surprising. Michigan has a higher blue chip ratio on the O-line than Texas does. Even Ohio State has a higher blue chip ratio on the O-line than Texas does. But there's just something about the Texas O-line where I'm willing to give it benefit of the doubt in a way that I'm not for Oklahoma. Like, Oklahoma will improve because the unit was that awful. It will improve in the same way that Iowa's improved from 2022 to 2023. It had to. It had to get better. And the scheme change will help too. So it's Ott or Baxter for the SEC, Hughes or Singleton for the Big Ten. Oh my goodness. Thank you, SFS and O. Looks like he did. I can't pull up your super chat, SFS inverted. Did you delete it? I think you did delete it, which is makes sense. I was going to say thank you for the $20 super chat, but anyway. Thank you for all the support that you give and the fact that you're a moderator on here. I really appreciate it. Okay, the pissed off Ohioan. Thoughts on Juck Buck saying he chalked up an Ohio State win against Michigan for the next 2 years? Well, I mean, I'm not going to say it's delusional because Ohio State should be better than Michigan the next 2 years. But the games in Ann Arbor, there's just as much evidence to suggest that Ryan Day winning it all means he's going to double down on his current strategy instead of change it. And Ohio State, I mean, people have talked about Michigan losing a bunch on the D-line, and they have, and they'll regress there. Ohio State's going to regress way more than Michigan on the D-line. And if you argue, well, they've recruited better or whatever. Michigan has 6 defensive tackles, I think, in their... No. Actually, yeah, because they run a 4-2-5 multiple, and they have like a... They have, within their 3 deep, I think they have 6 defensive tackles, or 5 of them at 300 pounds, and Ohio State only has 2 or 3. So... Michigan has a size advantage once again at the D-line in a way that they didn't last year. Michigan was better on the D-line last year, but you're probably going to see with Ohio State's defensive scheme change and with Ohio State's concerns in regards to different things. I don't know. I'm going to get back to this comment after I answer SFS inverted super chat. I completely butchered typing the previous super chats. That's why I deleted it. Well, like I said, thank you for all the hard work, man. Keep it up. Yeah, thank you very much, SFS Inverted. I appreciate it a lot. Thank you again for that $10 super chat. I really appreciate it. Make sure to stick around and ask me any questions. You made a video a month ago about my playoff proposal that I gave, and you said you'd cover it more in depth. I will get around to that. I've been so busy with different things. I mean, I've been releasing an average of, 3 videos per day if not more than that if you count the lives. So I'll try and get around to it next week or maybe the week after for what my ideal playoff proposal would be. So thank you, Jude Hansen, for asking that. Let me get back to the pissed off Ohioan. Chalked up an Ohio State win against Michigan the next 2 years. So either either a lot of people are right that the mental hump with Day is over against Michigan and he's going to finally come out and win it, or people just can't process that Michigan can win 5 games in a row because honestly half of those wins kind of defied the usual laws of college football. Ohio State should have won last year. They probably should have won in 2022, although more so should have won last year because they weren't a touchdown better than Michigan in 2022. They weren't a touchdown. They were three touchdowns better than Michigan last year. The spread last year was accurate. No one just expected Day to wet the bed that poorly. I'm at the point where, and maybe I am wrong for this. Maybe I'm wrong for this, but after that Michigan game, I've kind of put a cap on how I view Day in regards to his ceiling. So there was a part of me that entering that Michigan game last year, I could have saw Day become the leader of the next dynasty in college football and position himself to easily be the best head coach in the country. The Michigan game took that away. Like Nick Saban never loses a game like that. He doesn't. And maybe that's a way too early overreaction. But keep in mind, a lot of these Ohio State people, even the logical ones, like and there's a lot of logical ones. Like Ohio State's fan base is pretty wonderful. So yeah, just is. I mean, they've done a really nice job, I think, supporting the channel, and I've enjoyed their presence. What I will say, though, is most Ohio State people wanted Day fired, and now he is kind of canonized after the playoff run. It's quite a massive swing, and I think Day went being a little undervalued after the playoffs, or not after the playoffs, but after the Michigan game, because I kind of thought to myself after the Michigan game, he'll make a ton of staff changes. He will still at some point beat Michigan. It's just going to take a little bit longer than I thought, and he'll eventually win it all again. Didn't think it would be last year, is where I was wrong, but I didn't think all of a sudden after that loss to Michigan he was like a coach outside the top 15 who was carried by Urban's talent and system. Didn't think that way at all. Day is a little bit overvalued now. You see it in even the S&P Plus metric provided by Bill Connolly. I think that it's pretty clear when you look at what Ohio State did with the talent they had last year and what Georgia did with the talent they had last year and the schedules they played that I think Smart is a better game manager. Day's number 2. But I think that, you have to stay steady and you can't make drastic swings, and something that I think, and this is where Ohio State needs to be careful, because Day is a coach who's receptive to outside pressure. Day is a coach who reads headlines. Like the Lou Holtz thing makes that obvious. Like that guy pays attention to media, probably because he's a decent person and not a complete psychopath. What you don't want to happen is that you like it's like what Caleb Downs did. There were reports where he wanted to take down Ohio State's championship banner stuff to get the team refocused on the following year. You don't want to make such a drastic swing in thought that you get caught off guard when things don't go your way, I guess is my point. I like Juck. I love the stuff he makes. The fact that he is, predicting Ohio State to win for the next 2 years against Michigan. I mean, it's an opinion at this point. Michigan could be anywhere from 5-7 to 12-0 next year. If they're undefeated entering the game, I can probably tell you that means they're good enough to where, unless Ohio State is a better team than they were last year, don't know if they would win that. or unless they were the same team as last year. Don't know if they win that. But if Michigan is bad again, Ohio State will probably win in a blowout, because I don't see that same thing occurring again as to what happened last year. Those are my thoughts really on that. I mean, it's something I see everywhere. A lot of Ohio State fans are saying he'll never lose to Michigan again, and I get it, but be careful, because you're also tacitly saying losing to Michigan's a fluke, and that's what's caused, I would say, half of Ohio State's losses to Michigan, is believing that this is a fluke that will be naturally corrected if we just do what Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel did. And that works if you're way better than Michigan, but you shouldn't have to rely on being way better than your opponent every year to beat them. You should beat them, especially if that game matters that much. So maybe that's wrong. Maybe it's a long-winded answer. Thank you to the pissed off Ohioan for asking that question. Yeah, I mean, I can see it. I can also see Michigan winning 2 in a row the next few years against Ohio State. I don't know which is more likely. I know Ohio State's more likely to be the better team, but I also know, looking at last year, it's not just a thing in Day's head. It's not. It's in these players' heads too. That's why Ohio State's O-line, which for much of the year, even when it was banged up, was better than Michigan, looked so bad, and Michigan's looked that much better in game. Like, just did. And the D-lines weren't that much different from each other. Michigan's was better, but Ohio State, I would say, had the second best starting D-line at the end of the year. That was a really good unit. And they were that good in November, same as they were in the playoffs. And they couldn't get any pressure on Michigan. And Michigan did a much better job swallowing up superior running backs than what they had compared to what Ohio State did with them. Like, Michigan's players take this game more personally than Ohio State's do. Not saying they care about it more, but Ohio State cares about it in the way that they expect to always win, and Michigan cares about it from my standpoint in the way that they expect everyone to pick them to lose, and it just makes them happier to have a chance to win, if you catch what I'm saying. So I don't know. I will say I'm much more confident in Ohio State losing to Texas and Penn State than I am to Michigan. But that's also because I think Texas and Penn State would beat Michigan by probably a combined 60 points. So just due to matchups, and then Michigan being several, I think, maybe not several touchdowns, neutral field, once you factor in matchups, yes, but definitely I would say 10 points, if not a little bit more than that, worse than Texas and Penn State neutral field. So that's kind of why. But I'm also not confident in Ohio State beating Michigan this year either. They should beat them. They should expect to. But last year was the layup year. Like that was an automatic win, and it wasn't an automatic win, and that is, it's not good. It's not good. It isn't. And I don't think Ohio State has the roster build this year to where they should be viewed as blowing out Michigan. Like, I'm sorry to say this, but the talk about the Ohio State playoff O-line, if Michigan had Ohio State's supporting cast, their O-line would have looked just as good. It just would have. And I don't think Michigan's O-line's anything special. And as for Ohio State and Michigan's D-line, Michigan has developed better. Michigan is deeper. Michigan is older there than Ohio State is. Michigan is bigger there than Ohio State is. They may not have the same amount of, type 2 muscle fibers. They may not have the same athleticism, but they're bigger. Michigan's running backs are, Justice Haynes is viewed as more talented than C.J. Donaldson, for example, and more talented than James Peoples. Ohio State finally has tight end. They've always had wide receiver. And quarterback, Ohio State should have, but in terms of high school talent, I mean, there is a world where Bryce Underwood by the end of the year is better than Julian Sain at the end of the year. It's unlikely, but it could happen. Last year was the layup year, and now you have a lot of other things that probably regress back to Michigan's way that don't to Ohio State. As I let some more comments load in the chat, I do want to get back to my top 25 and having you guys help me build that. And I'll get to some more questions because I see that you guys have some more, but we'll march on, talk about some other things. I want to, of course, get to, that top 25. Apologies for the eye. There's something in my eye. So Clemson's at 3, Texas is at 2, Penn State's at 1. In that remaining category of, I would say, a tier 2, Penn State's, actually I'll call it tier 1. Penn State's in tier insane. Texas, Clemson, Georgia, Oregon, Ohio State, and Alabama are in tier 1. These are all teams who can win it all. Outside of these teams, I don't know if there's anyone else who can win it all. There are some who are outside, but they have much lower floors, more limited ceilings, typically involve coaching staffs that either hit the reset button or are early in their career, so not all of their players are theirs, for example, or they have questions, very deep questions, from my perspective. So, again, Penn State 1, Texas 2, Clemson 3. I have Georgia at 4. And the simplicity of that is as much went right for Oregon and as much went right for Ohio State, the same amount, if not more, went wrong for Georgia. Wide receiver, busted. O-line could never be healthy. Secondary, had unusual struggles. The defense was not top 10 at the end of the year. Had games where it looked number 1, had games where it looked number 20. Carson Beck had multiple games with 3 interceptions, had a game against Tennessee where he was basically perfect. You have the way that they annihilated Clemson and how they returned a lot of production and how they put how they put 13 picks in the draft. At times looked like they could be number 1. Other times, again, looked like they weren't even a top 10 caliber team. A lot went wrong for Georgia last year. I don't think Stockton is as talented as Beck, but I think that the staff, I think that he fits what Georgia wants to do more, and he'll help open up the ground game with his mobility in a way that Beck couldn't. The run game was also so bad last year that I am expecting improvements. I am. I'm expecting the O-line to probably be better in terms of consistency. I don't think they'll have the same upside, but they'll be better in terms of consistency. I think actually Georgia and Ohio State in that regard are similar. I don't think, for example, that Ohio State will have a game where their O-line looked as terrible against an opponent of Nebraska's caliber like it did last year, but they also won't have Donovan Jackson. And I don't think Onyenwa, for example, is as good as Donovan Jackson. They also lose possibly a centennial caliber running back room that will be impossible to replace in year 1. Georgia has the similar issues at O-line in terms of what they replace. So, like Ohio State, they should be more consistent there, but you may not see the same upside at certain positions. They don't have the problem of losing generational running backs, though. They don't have that problem. Or moving from a dual-threat quarterback to more of a pro-style quarterback. They move from more of a pro-style to a dual-threat QB. I think Georgia is going to do a better job at controlling their opponents, game control. I believe that their wide receiver core is one of the better receiver cores in the SEC. It's very deep. You don't necessarily have a Ryan Williams, Ryan Wingo, or really anyone that Auburn does, and Cam Coleman, Eric Singleton Jr. I don't even think they have a Kevin Coleman or Deion Burks if he can stay healthy. But they have a lot of, good, great, nice wide receivers that will do a much better job than what they did last year. And I ultimately think that that matters right there. They catch up to some of these other teams that were better than them last year in a lot of areas, and a lot went wrong. A lot went wrong for them. You can believe me, you can not believe me, but watch their games and some of their performances. Like, watch their game against Alabama in the second half, and then their game against Texas round 1. Then watch them against Ole Miss, or watch them against Georgia Tech, or even against Auburn. Tell me that's the same team. It's not. Their consistency was all over the place. They were even more inconsistent in the regular season than Ohio State was. They just won their game, a very bad game against their rival that Ohio State happened to not do. That's what happened. So I expect Georgia to kind of regress to the mean, and I think that means they may actually improve or at least stay the same compared to last year. For Oregon, I have Oregon at 5. This one came as a shocker to me because originally I kind of had it set to where I thought Oregon was going to be pretty down, probably outside the top 6. But I like that Oregon's undervalued. Oregon isn't being talked about as a team that is on the Texas, Clemson, Georgia, or Ohio State, or even Alabama level this year. They're not. And yet their talent profile would tell you otherwise. Their staff would tell you otherwise. And I think that while they do lose a bunch, they have a problem of youth. That's their problem. Their players this year probably have a higher upside than their average starting player last year. The difference is last year's players were a bunch of seniors. This year's players are a bunch of sophomores, some juniors, maybe sprinkling some seniors in here and there, but also a lot of freshmen, especially in the second string and some that are even starting, whether redshirt freshmen, and maybe by the end of the year you see some true freshmen start for Oregon. I know Decory and Moore will. What I like about Oregon ahead of, let's say, Ohio State and Alabama, is Oregon, I like their starting trench play. If they can stay healthy on the O-line and on the D-line with their DNs, and if their DB development and the transfers they brought in there, combined with some younger players, just rise up, their defense should once again be in that top 20, top 25 range. It could be better as it continues to get more talented, and I think that this offense, while it does have the chance to be worse than last year's, also has the chance to be better because you have a quarterback with a higher upside. Mekhi Hughes, I think, is better than Jordan James. Their interior of the O-line should be better, although depth on the O-line is a bit of a concern. And they also have Decory and Moore, who I think is going to be better than anyone they had at wide receiver last year. I think that Decory and Moore will not be Jeremiah Smith this year nor last year, but I think he'll be better than what Ryan Williams was last year, maybe even what Ryan Williams is this year. So I love Oregon in that regard. It is bold having Oregon in terms of preseason odds. Alabama and Ohio State should be ahead of Oregon, but I'm putting Oregon there simply because I think they'll be able to do a better job of game control than I think Ohio State or Alabama will. So we get to Ohio State and Alabama. Then I'll get back to your questions in the chat or anything you have. So Ohio State's at 6th. Ohio State probably has more upward mobility than Georgia, Oregon, maybe Clemson. I wouldn't say Texas. I don't think they have more upward mobility than Texas. Maybe solely based on BCR, they have more upward mobility than Penn State. But I also think I think that Penn State's assistants and coordinators are better. Penn State's older. From a realistic standpoint, Penn State probably has the higher ceiling. Like, if everything, and I mean if everything went perfectly for every team, then Ohio State, Texas, and Alabama and Georgia, those would be your top 4 ceiling teams. But almost everything going right means everyone plays to their potential all the time, or plays to their maximum potential all the time. So everything going right for Penn State means Jim Knowles gets to field the defense like he did at Ohio State last year. And that also means Andy Kotelnicki gets to have like a 2019, they get to have like a 2019 Ohio State level offense where they can just run the ball on anyone, lot of goods at QB. That also means like everything going right for Ohio State means their offense is 2019 LSU, and their defense is probably the same as it was last year, which would translate to an even better team than what LSU had that year, like lightning in the bottle type stuff as LSU was. So Ohio State has a lot of upward mobility, but they have a quarterback change, which, like with Oregon, I'm not very concerned about. I actually think Sane will be a top 10 quarterback. I think he's underrated. Tight end, they upgrade. Wide receiver, they upgrade. Running back, they were very good in pass protection there at running back. Almost always had an extra player in the playoffs pass blocking for him, so that way it gave him a numbers advantage in pass protection. It was brilliant because no one can cover their receivers, so if you're Ohio State, you should go into max protect to help your O-line, to help your quarterback, to let the routes develop, and no one can cover even 3 or let alone 4 of your receivers at a given time. They're too athletic, they're too good, and Howard was on fire. They lose Judkins and Henderson. That's a centennial running back room. It's the best running back room that we've seen since maybe some of the Alabama rooms in the 2010s, or maybe we have to go back to 2005 with Reggie Bush and his backup. It was a really generational running back room, in truth. They lose both of them, and Donaldson is a player from the Big 12, older. Peoples and Bo Jackson are the younger guys, who I think as the year progresses will begin to get more touches than Donaldson. Their O-line, a lot of experience. They're not as talented as Ohio State's used to. There's no one who's projected to be a first-round overall pick right now on that offensive line, and they don't have staff continuity there. I don't think that's very important because I don't think Justin Fry was all that good, but it may take some time to make up for the lack of recruiting talent in that room. And the fact that, I just talked about how Oregon's depth is concerning on the O-line, because it is. And for most teams it is. I think the only team that doesn't have concerning depth on the offensive line, or at least there's not an argument for, it's Penn State. Probably Penn State and Alabama. Those are some of the only schools where you can look at those O-lines and say, yeah, maybe upside's a concern, or maybe how they'll be used is a concern, or how consistent will they be. But depth isn't a concern. They can sustain an injury and be fine. Ohio State's the same way as 99% of other schools, where if they get an injury on the O-line, there will be issues. Defensively, I love safety. I love linebacker. The D-line I like because of Caden McDonald and Edric Houston, but it's a big drop-off from last year's unit, and especially that's the case in terms of size. Both their D-ends and D-tackles are smaller than they were last year, and the amount of high-end projected first-round talent has also dropped off precipitously. So that's something to pay attention to. It's a lot like Michigan's, but a little bit more extreme there. So this will be a team that, if they can minimize trench warfare, they can beat everyone. The problem is, whenever they play Texas or a Penn State or Clemson, if Clemson's run-blocking O-line comes to play, I have concerns as to whether they'll be able to easily get around those teams. They will, of course, have some success through the air against anyone, if not good success. But they have enough questions to where I think that they're taking a step back. And compared to them in Oregon, it was tough. And I go back and forth on this. Like right now, I'm kind of convincing myself that Ohio State should be ahead of Oregon. But then I go back to the fact that Oregon is leveling up in terms of roster talent, and Oregon's roster talent's more spread out evenly. That's why Ohio State is such a, I think, unique situation there, where their ceiling might be so high to where they could just easily repeat. And they could also go 9-3, and then they make staff changes after this year, because they have fully bought in, and you see this with their recruiting classes. They have fully invested in the idea that Brian Hartline is our best asset, and we are going to invest as much talent into receiver as possible. Like, the O-line this year is finally recruiting at a higher level entering 2026, just as the D-line's kind of tanking there. And that's because if you recruit wide receiver that well, and they do, you're not going to have the funds or space to out-recruit everyone else in the trenches, or on the O-line or D-line. Maybe one, but not both, for sure. So that's a question I have. Plus, Sayin, for example, younger than Ty Simpson, younger than Dante Moore, younger than Stockton, younger than Klubnik, than Arch Manning, than Aller. Out of all these teams that I think can win the national title with respectable odds, Sayin's the youngest QB. Now, I think he'll be better than most of these QBs. The only QBs at this moment that I think will be better than him are Aller and Klubnik for sure. Probably Manning. Definitely Manning at the beginning of the year. I don't know about the end of the year, though. We'll have to see. I think he'll definitely be better than Moore. Definitely be better than Stockton, along with Ty Simpson. Absolutely confident he'll be better than those players, especially Ty Simpson and Gunnar Stockton. However, this is kind of a steelman argument against my belief that Sayin's going to be amazing right out of the gate. There's a chance that he isn't. He's a redshirt freshman. Not every redshirt freshman that comes through Ohio State is C.J. Stroud. Not every one. Okay, let's look at another super chat that we have. Okay, hey, sorry I'm late. I hope all is well. No problem, Chris Lane. Thank you for joining in. Thank you for the $2 super chat. I really, really appreciate it. Okay, this is a hot take as the sun. I think Nebraska can beat Penn State. No. No, that's not happening. That's not happening. Not happening. Not happening. It's not happening. I mean, that is a matchup that will be worse for Nebraska than Indiana versus Ohio State was last year. And this will especially be the case if Nebraska enters that game ranked high. If Nebraska enters the game ranked high, and people are talking about talking about both teams and how maybe they'll rematch in the Big Ten or something, Nebraska entering that game with Penn State being much deeper, I would argue Penn State's better at every position compared to Nebraska, literally every position. What will happen is the moment will be too much for Nebraska. It will. Road game in an environment that will be unlike anything they've ever seen. Like they played at Ohio State last year, but that was a noon game, and maybe Nebraska Penn State would be noon. Like that could be noon for sure. But Happy Valley at noon is louder than I think at least it's louder or just as loud. So it'll be an environment just like Ohio Stadium. Could be even more intimidating depending on when it's played. And Penn State's just going to overwhelm them at every point. I mean, that's not a good matchup. I love the optimism. Love it. Seriously, I love it. But I don't think so. Okay. Let me see what else is in here. Is there a way Purdue could win 6 games this year? Asks the final quarter. Okay, so let me look at Purdue's schedule. Purdue, they got Ball State and Southern Illinois. They're going to beat those teams. They have USC at home. I guess if everything goes wrong for USC, maybe they could beat them, but I don't think so. Notre Dame on the road week 4. They're not beating them. Illinois off the bye in week 6. It's a rivalry game, and they have a bye. They could win that game, so that's 3. At Minnesota week 7, it's a Big Ten West team. It's unlikely, but possible. At Northwestern, hosting Rutgers weeks 8 and 9. I think that week 6 to 9 stretch, plus Ball State and Southern Illinois. If Purdue does get to 6 wins there, that's how it will happen. I think is beating Ball State, Southern Illinois, Minnesota, Northwestern, and Rutgers, because they're not beating Notre Dame on the road, probably not beating USC. You're probably not beating Michigan on the road, Ohio State at home, Washington on the road, or Indiana at home. There's a path. It's unlikely, but there is a path, I think, if everything goes right. Sam, what is your opinion on people saying Ohio State lost a lot of players, but so did Texas? I think that take is too trendy, in my opinion. Well, thank you, Cole, for asking that question. My answer would be that I believe there's legitimacy to both. There is, but Texas's roster's older. It is, and that's a big thing. Their quarterback has a few more starts. They have more benefit of the doubt to be given on the O-line. Texas should probably be as good at wide receiver as they were last year, given the talent in the room and what they bring back. Their running attack should be much better, while Ohio State should be worse. Defensively, Texas added D tackles through the portal. Ohio State didn't. Now Ohio State's non-portal players on their roster at D tackle, at least who were going to start, were probably better than Texas's, but not by this crazy margin. So the fact that Texas, added 4 or 5 D tackles and Ohio State added none, I think de facto makes Texas have the better D-line, especially with Colin Simmons. Linebacker, you can look up PFF grades, you can look up NFL, draft projections. Anthony Hill Jr. is the best linebacker of the group, and Trey Moore could be the second best, although I would probably put Arvell Reese ahead of Moore and Sonny Styles behind Trey Moore. Secondary, you have Ohio State with the higher upside because of Caleb Downs, but Ohio State has been inconsistent at corner for probably 2 of the 3 seasons Walton's been there. And Texas, I feel like Texas solved their secondary issues last year. They do lose Jahdae Barron and Makuba. I'm concerned about how they'll replace both, but I'm also concerned with how Ohio State will replace, Hancock, Ransom, and Burke. I mean, as people have pointed out before again and again, there's a reason that Burke started all year, because he was good, and the backups to him probably weren't better than he was. A lot of people take me as being super low on Ohio State, but I feel like it's because a lot of my audience are Ohio State fans, and they're very high on the team. That makes sense. They won their first natty in 10 years, and it was an emotional roller coaster last year since they came on the right side of it. They really want to defend their team. I'm actually not very low on Ohio State, so I think Ohio State. If you gave Ohio State, let's say you gave them Oregon's schedule, they go 11-1. If you gave them Indiana's schedule, they go 10-2 or 11-1. You give them USC's schedule, they go 11-1 or 12-0. Me picking Ohio State to go under their win total and thinking it's kind of a best bet says more about what I think of Penn State and Texas than Ohio State. That's just my opinion. I think that more things align with those teams than with Ohio State this year, just like how I think a lot of things align for Ohio State next year to have potentially another championship winning year. A&M is a playoff team this year. This year in CFB is going to be a crazy one. No more blue bloods in college football. Parity means coaching and continuity will be paramount. To a certain degree, yes, but we do not have anything close to talent parity yet, College Station kid. Although I agree, you will see I have A&M in my playoff bracket. That's coming soon. The final quarter says Ohio State 5. How can you have the Ducks at 5? Their whole team is injured. Their whole team isn't injured. They have an injury to Evan Stewart and Aiden Breland, but their whole team is not hurt. This might be one that I will change. Might be. Part of it is a gut feeling that everyone's underestimating Oregon and that a good portion of people are just expecting Ohio State to reload. So originally, everyone thought that Matt Patricia would kind of be this bust, except Ohio State fans. Now it feels like only Michigan fans and maybe some traumatized Lion, MSU, and Ohio State fans think there's any chance he can fail. I mean, this is even worked on me. I went from thinking that Patricia was a pretty bad hire to now thinking it was just, we'll see how it pans out. I don't think it's, fantastic. I don't think it's awful either. But there's a world where it is fantastic and a world where it's awful. It's a very risky hire. I would liken it to Notre Dame hiring Chris Ash is what I would liken it to, except I think Patricia has both a higher floor and higher ceiling. With Oregon, at least, I'm familiar with their staff's strengths, weaknesses, with their tendencies. They have coordinator continuity. We've seen Hartline attempt to call plays before in 2023. Didn't work out. And when Day took back the reins, it was a little unstable, probably because I don't think Day expected to take back the reins. Either that or McCord just was so bad at the beginning of the year that it really hampered everything. But it wasn't just McCord that year. I mean, the O-line was a mess that year. McCord was a mess. They didn't have really great running backs outside of Henderson, and he wasn't healthy for the whole year. It was a season of what-ifs, really, for that Ohio State team. Like I said, Ohio State does have a higher ceiling than Oregon, but Oregon has more familiarity. Oregon has probably more true freshmen that could have an impact on the field than Ohio State could, and while that may be a sign of weakness, that could also, I mean, there's a lot of true freshmen at Ohio State right now who I wouldn't be surprised if they were in the rotation on defense. So I have Oregon at 5 more so for continuity's sake and for the fact that I could see Ohio State being number 1 or number 8 or 9 at the end of the year. With Oregon, I kind of see them stuck in between that 7 to probably 3 range. So I'm going with the team that has the higher floor, I guess, here from my perspective. And maybe that's insane, but that's kind of my thought process there. Willing to change it, though. And I kind of feel like Ohio State should be, and maybe I'm just ranking Oregon ahead to buck trends. So I'll have to think about that one more. Let me write that down. Last thing before we get off, because we have been on here for a little bit, any content ideas you guys have, or anything you want me to do during the regular season, please let me know. So an example is I'm thinking of doing an Ohio State-Michigan live show once a week. I don't know when it would be, but I've always been passionate about covering the game, covering Ohio State, covering Michigan. Always been passionate about it. And why not? Why not make like a live show to cover it? And, release segments about it. They wouldn't be very long segments, and I imagine the live show wouldn't be more than an hour, unlike my others that are, typically much longer. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the live chat what you think about that idea. What do you think about me talking about ESPN's FPI or the college football playoff rankings for maybe 5 or 10 minutes every week, like making short episodes on that? Let me know. I would totally be down for that if you guys want. Just let me know what you think. Okay, let me see. Nick P. on 3 as Illinois around 4th or 5th in the Big Ten. Thoughts? Okay. I am going to let you know. And hi, Blue Wolverine. Hey, how are you doing? Cole Werbrich. Yeah, Werbrich says, I appreciate the answer, Sam. Of course, always. Ohio State has probably the highest blue chip ratio, says Chris Lane. They do. It's tied for Alabama at 89%. Breaking news as about 30 minutes ago, Tony Patini requested that Michigan does not face additional consequences for the sign stealing scandal. That was breaking news a few hours ago. It was. Doesn't mean all that much, honestly. From my perspective, I'm honestly kind of all of I'm over that. I'm ready to move on. Okay, but to get back to Nick P's question, Illinois is the most overvalued team in America. They have a better shot of going 5-7 than reaching the college football playoff. They have a better shot of missing a bowl game than going to the college football playoff. Their O-line was bad last year. Their defensive line's losing a lot, and it probably will regress this season. They are not big in either of those areas. Mostly the D-line. I'd have to do more research on the O-line off the top of my head. I don't know how big their O-line is, but their D-line's not big. Their linebacker room is experienced, but their defense was inconsistent at times last year. I love their secondary. I really, really love it, but at the same time, against bigger, better competition in Illinois had a somewhat light schedule last year. Against the better wide receivers and QBs, they lost out. So Oregon destroyed them. Oregon absolutely annihilated that team. Lost to Minnesota. There was a world where they, lose to Rutgers or Michigan or Kansas, and Kansas quarterback couldn't help himself but give the ball to the other team. Illinois is beyond overvalued. Beyond overvalued. And their schedule, I don't think matches up quite as well in the nuances as it did last year. So, for example, they have to travel to Duke. They have to travel to Indiana. To Purdue's a rivalry game. They almost lost last year. I mean, Illinois versus Purdue last year was a 50-49 final score. Purdue nearly beat Illinois. Illinois had to play at Washington, or has to this year. They have to play at Wisconsin. So they have, 5 road games, and I would venture that against Indiana and Washington, they'll be underdogs. Purdue, they won't be a massive favorite. Duke, I don't know who'll be favored in that game, but I could see Duke being favored. And then against Wisconsin, I could see either team being favored. They're not going to be favored over Ohio State at home or USC at home. Rutgers. So Illinois returned 76% of their production. Rutgers returned 71% of their production. Rutgers had a much better O-line last year. Rutgers' defense was almost flukishly bad. I mean, there's a good chance, just based on metrics and the law of close games, that Rutgers will be better than Illinois. Just do not buy them. Don't do it. This is coming from someone who, last year thought that, as the season progressed, I think I picked Kansas to beat Illinois, and I know I picked Nebraska to beat them, but I predicted Illinois after I doubted them in September. I basically picked them to win all the games outside of Penn State and Oregon for the rest of October, if my memory serves me correctly. Did I pick Michigan State to beat Illinois? I forget if I did or didn't. Maybe I'm wrong there, but Illinois won a bunch of close games. They won 5 or 6 close games, only lost 1 or 2 of them. So I'm kind of over Illinois. The fact they were 4th in the preseason Big Ten media poll, they were ahead of USC, they were ahead of Michigan, they were ahead of Indiana. Those are 3 teams where I look at those rosters and they are better than Illinois. And not just better overall, but they are better built for the Big Ten than Illinois' roster is. If Brett Bielema, for whatever reason, listens to this podcast, by all means, eat that up, eat up the motivation, because I would love to see Illinois reach the playoffs. I would, but I just don't think that it's going to happen. I don't. I think there's a better chance they go again 5-7, 6-6, 7-5 than they do 11-1. And I think they would have to go 11-1 to get a guaranteed playoff berth, because say they go 10-2, but they lose to Ohio State and Indiana, and maybe both of those are blowout losses. Like maybe they play Ohio State competitively because it's at home, but then Ohio State pulls away and wins by 21, 24, 27, 28, 31 points at the end of the game. Say from the get-go against Indiana just outpaces them, and it looks like the Ravens versus Lions from 2 years ago. It's just a bloodbath. You know who's going to win by halftime. They're not getting in the playoffs. They won't even be ranked top 15 if that's their resume, because outside of maybe USC and Duke, they're not going to have anyone on the schedule with enough wins of their own to have a good win. And Duke won a bunch of close games, so there's a chance Duke regresses a lot. USC lost a bunch of close games, but USC also loses a ton of production, and they have to, travel to their travel schedule is better than it was last year, but they still have to, travel to Notre Dame. They have to, play Michigan. I don't even think Michigan State's a guaranteed win for USC. I mean, USC is a lot like Michigan, where they could go 6-6, 7-5, or they could be 12-0 and a legitimate team that's knocking on the door of being top 5 in power ratings. That's USC and Michigan right there. Illinois is not that. Illinois is a team that, at the very worst, could go 5-7, 6-6. Maybe if Altmaier gets hurt, even 4-8, and then they have a ceiling of probably 11-1 or maybe even 12-0. But if they go 11-1 or 12-0, it won't be in the way that Michigan or USC could go, where they just start, whether it's because their staffs wake up or, they take advantage of easier schedules, they begin to really dominate people. If Illinois goes 12-0, they're going to defy the law of close games in its entirety, and then it will catch up to them in the playoffs. Their roster's limited. I don't think their staff is elite. It's good, but it's not elite, and I don't like them. I'm selling them. I think that Vegas is begging you to bet on Illinois to go to the playoffs and to do big things. They are begging you to do that. It makes no sense given who they were last year. I mean, that's why Illinois started off at like plus 500 or plus 600 to reach the playoffs. They had same odds, if not worse odds than USC. They have worse odds than USC to win the Big Ten, guys. They do. But everyone's betting on Illinois. So Vegas is like, all right, you're pouring in money. Let's raise it up. Let's lessen the odds. for Illinois or let's increase the odds that Illinois reaches the playoff, or let's move their win total up a game. It's the ultimate honeypot. It's a trap. Don't bet on Illinois. And thank you for coming to my TED Talk on that topic. Okay, let's finish out my top 10. So, to round out my top 10, and then we'll get on out of here. My top 10 teams, again, we have so far gone over Penn State 1 in a tier of their own. In the next tier down, we got Texas 2, Clemson 3, Georgia 4, Oregon 5, Ohio State 6, Alabama at 7. They have the age of Clemson, Texas, and Penn State, and more blue-chip talent than any of them. But I do not trust their assistant coaches at the same level that I do Clemson, Texas, and Penn State's. I don't. Coordinators, different story. But I don't trust their assistants, and I also think that it only being year 2 removed from that 2023 team means their players, from my perspective, won't be quite as developed as Clemson's, Texas's, or Penn State's. Plus, I think that Ty Simpson will be the worst quarterback out of the top 4 teams in my top 10 when you look at the oldest ones. So Penn State, Texas, Clemson, Alabama. Alabama will have the worst quarterback out of them, I think, by a decent chunk. So that's a big part of the reason I have Alabama at 7th. These are other teams that are in contention for my top 10. I have Indiana, Texas A&M, Michigan, USC, Notre Dame, and Miami. Those are teams that I think make up the next tier. After that, I have not even thought about that, really. I think I wouldn't be shocked if teams 14 through 25 or 14 lower look completely different. Wouldn't shock me at all. So, yeah. I mean, let me know what you think in the live chat about who should round out that top 10 between Indiana, A&M, Michigan, USC, Notre Dame, and Miami. I am definitely going with Indiana and A&M. The question is, who's that 10th spot? Michigan, USC, Notre Dame, and Miami. Notre Dame and Miami have the most talent. Michigan and USC are the oldest. USC, I think, is the most... I think they have the best X-Factor staffer on their team outside of maybe Notre Dame's Mike Denbrock. But again, Notre Dame's young, going through a QB philosophy change. And I think Notre Dame's schedule, style of play, and the opponents they played really played into their hands. So I think Notre Dame does regress to the mean a little bit. USC, meanwhile, a lot went wrong for them last year. There's a chance they regress to the mean in a positive way. Michigan is a much better QB. Their defensive backfield should be better. You would think that offensive tackle can't get any worse and that they've upgraded at running back as well. And then you have Miami. Miami is the team, I think, out of this bunch that has the highest ceiling but also the lowest floor. So I think they have a higher ceiling than anyone on this list, including A&M. So by list, I mean the next tier. So tier 2, Indiana, A&M, Michigan, USC, Notre Dame, and Miami. Yes, I think Miami has a higher ceiling than Notre Dame. I do. But their floor is pretty, it's pretty low. Their floor is pretty low. And losing round 1, pick 1 to the NFL, and all those receivers they did, some of their offensive line, great running back in Damian Martinez, and a lot of the D-line depth they had that would have been helpful to retain this year, but they couldn't because they ran out of eligibility, that is a big deal. So, curious as to what your thoughts are. I'm going to get off here in probably a minute or so. This was a successful stream for being an improvisational stream. Okay, the final quarter. You also said do live shows and some Friday night games. I will consider it, but it takes a lot out of me to live stream games. It really does. I might do it, but it will take a lot out of me, especially when I'm trying to do announcing and play-by-play. It'll take a lot out of me. So I don't know if I'm going to be doing that this year. But we'll have to see. Notre Dame at 8, and then the final quarter also says 9 Florida, 10 A&M. Florida, in terms of overall potential, is probably top 10, but I can't get over Billy Napier. I can't do it. I just can't do it. Now, then again, you could also make the argument that, if you have enough talent, then game management sometimes doesn't matter. See Gene Chizik with Auburn, or kind of what I think Penn State's going to be this year with Franklin. But Florida, I think, does have some questions a little bit on defense and a tad bit at wide receiver. O-line, running back, QB, and D-line, though, is basically as good as you could get given Florida's current roster, and that means a lot. So I didn't have Florida quite in my top 15 last ranking. I'll probably have them top 15 this next ranking cycle, which I think I will release at the beginning of next week, probably end of this week is when I'll release. Let's just shoot for beginning of next week. Don't want to make too many promises. I can see Florida being a top 10 team. I can, in terms of the power ratings. That's how I rank things, by the way. I'm not ranking teams based on how I think they'll do against their schedule or strength of record. I'm ranking teams based on power ratings. So who would be better over who neutral field? Yeah, the final quarter says Florida's going to shock the world this season. Book it. Big Ten, Big Toe says, I need to see Indiana beat a good team first. Don't trust what they did last year. I do, because of how dominant they were, but I understand the skepticism. I mean, my initial prediction for Indiana was that they were going to go 11-1 and win a playoff game. I still think if they managed to make the playoffs, they would win a playoff game, probably, especially if they were to get a home game, because I do think they're a top 10 caliber team. But as you all will see, I don't have them at 11-1 anymore. I don't. I think they're going to slip up to someone else. And not slip up. They're probably just going to straight up lose to someone else besides what I think is close to an auto loss at Penn State in Week 11. The talent just isn't there. Cignetti would have to probably be the best coach in the country with the best staff in the country for this team to go 11-1 or better. It's possible, because I think that highly of Cignetti's staff, but is it likely? No. No, it is not. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. We got a lot of super chats, got some views, some likes. Let me know what content you want to see in the live chat. One more thing before we go. Matthew Ray, Georgia Tech is very undervalued. They were a 10-2 playoff team in best case scenario undefeated. 100% agree with that. Chris Lane, Patricia is a great football mind. You just never really know, especially in year one. That's my point. I think if they retain Patricia entering 26, it will be a better situation. But we saw this with Wink Martindale, where Wink Martindale had a defense that I think was better built for the Big Ten than this Ohio State one, in the sense that their weakness was in the backfield, but they were very strong up front with like they had two, if not three, if not four, with Will Johnson healthy, like first round epic X Factor players. Now, Ohio State had that at the end of the year, last year, but entering this year, I'm kind of thinking it's just Downs and one of the linebackers. Like, I think that Martindale had a better defensive situation than Patricia does, and Martindale's been in the business in the 2020s more than Patricia has for defensive play calling. And he's running a system that, was similar to the one he inherited. Patricia's going to try and change some things. So I think initially you will see some struggles, but I think as time goes on and they learn Patricia and Patricia learns them, that things will get better. Okay, guys, I'll see you soon. We'll see you tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern time for a more scripted professional show. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a great day. Bye-bye.